Every artist has their magnum opus. Kanye has My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Michael Jackson has Thriller. Prince has Purple Rain. For The Weeknd, that album, his magnum opus, is After Hours. While many figured that the Toronto native would focus more on radio hits and topping charts following his 2016 album Starboy, Abel would prove to the world that he's more than your typical pop star with the release of his fourth studio record. During both the lead up and fallout of After Hours' release, The Weeknd would gradually alter his appearance, telling a story with his look alone on late night shows and red carpets. Additionally, The Weeknd would put out movie-like short films and detailed music videos reflecting his passion as an artist to tell a story. But above all, The Weeknd's After Hours acts as a sonic spectacle. Paralleling the horrors of Los Angeles to a tragic love doomed to fail, The Weeknd's fourth studio album is seen to many as one of the most breathtaking projects of the last decade. Displaying Abel's true artistic ability beyond radio hits, the record exposes the horrors of fame and tells a tragic story of grief in relation to losing a lover and a toxic relationship. From upbeat highs such as Blinding Lights to depression anthems with the title track, The Weeknd takes the listener along for the ride as he undergoes every emotion involved with being your own worst enemy, destroying a relationship that meant the absolute world to you, and hurting the very person you love the most as they leave you all alone to bleed out. Detailing the lead up to the album's release and the deeper meaning behind each thrilling track, this is the story of The Weeknd's After Hours. The Weeknd had an interesting discography prior to 2020. You have Trilogy and Kissland, which have heavy themes of addiction, sex, drugs, and overall just truly dark elements and toxic love stories that people really resonated with. Despite the depressing aura of his early work, The Weeknd was supplying listeners with a revolutionizing sound that nobody else in the music industry back then had the balls to produce. With his second commercial album, Beauty Behind the Madness, Abel would slightly evolve his sound. While lyrics still discuss darker themes like drug addiction, Abel would take that depressed atmosphere and shift it into a pop sound. With Beauty Behind the Madness being the album that truly propelled Abel into mainstream superstardom, he would capitalize on the attention by releasing a less narratively driven album only 1 year later, that being 2016's Starboy. While Starboy definitely has some bangers, the general consensus in The Weeknd's fandom is that the record is pretty bloated and has a few skips. While I personally love the record, it definitely was a departure from The Weeknd's previously detailed storytelling, something that he would pick back up on once again with his 2018 EP, My Dear Melancholy. So you got the darker records early on in his career that truly defined Abel's identity as an artist. Then you got the two mainstream hits albums that were really frequently played on the radio and shit. And then right when you think he's leaning more into a pop, radio-friendly sound, he comes out with that 2018 EP that really ties back to his darker roots. The big question for fans of The Weeknd when speculation began regarding him working on another project was, what was next? Would Abel continue the trend of calling back to his early work with a darker record? Would he get back to making radio hits and top the charts? Or would he change his sound and try something completely new sonically? The answer was a combination of all three. In November of 2018, speculation regarding Abel's next project would begin as The Weeknd would announce, while performing live in Canada, that he was working on a new album. On November 6th, he would speak to fans in attendance of a Toronto concert about his intense inspiration being back in the city. Abel would say, I want you guys to be the first to know that I'm working on my new album right now. Following this, Abel would start to refer to his albums as chapters in his career on social media. And this all began when Abel would tweet out, "Some chapters are smaller than others." Not this next one, though. It was clear that the My Dear Melancholy era was over, and Abel was entering chapter 6 of his career. In January of 2019, Abel would cryptically tweet again about the upcoming project, saying, "No more daytime music." Now, the way I understood this was like, the songs on this upcoming album are going to be best appropriate to be played at night. Now, whether or not you're playing them at night at a nightclub because they're just like total bangers, or you're listening to them high as fuck at 3 a.m. like crying alone, honestly, looking back, kind of both fit. The studio sessions for The Weeknd's 4th studio album began in fall of 2018 and raged on through the summer of 2019, as Abel tweeted out about the project's progression in August. With being in the studio so much and working on these new tracks, fans would not hear much from Abel as he was fully in album mode. But finally, after being teased about new music for over a year, fans would get to hear a snippet of a new track. In November of 2019, a song expected to be on the album would be previewed in a Mercedes-Benz commercial. This song would later be known as Blinding Lights. Following the Mercedes collab, Abel would foreshadow new music dropping, as he tweeted out, "The fall begins tomorrow." On November 27th, a day after that tweet, The Weeknd would officially release the lead single for his upcoming album, titled Heartless. 2 days later, on November 29th, the second single, Blinding Lights, would be released as well. Despite having 2 singles on streaming, fans still knew next to nothing regarding Abel's 4th studio album. They didn't even know what it was going to be called. That would all change in February of 2020, as The Weeknd would release a video to YouTube titled Album Title. In the video, Abel is seen driving through the city, where an at the time unknown song acts as the score. The song's tempo slows as the visuals become blurry, and letters slowly fade into place to reveal the album's official title, After Hours. The title stems from the time of day in which Abel is most emotional and in his feelings about his ex, who is the sole inspiration for this album. On February 19th, Abel would release the song After Hours as a promotional single. Along with dropping the title track, he would also reveal the cover art for After Hours at this time. The cover was a picture of Abel smiling, with blood dripping down his face. A big element of the After Hours story is celebrities putting on a face for the public, which we'll elaborate on in a minute. But with Abel smiling in the cover despite obviously being in pain, with blood visually pouring out of his mouth, he is attempting to mask himself and hide his suffering despite the pain being very real. On March 20th, 2020, The Weeknd would officially release his 4th studio album, After Hours. At 14 tracks long with a runtime just under an hour, the album would usher in a new sound for The Weeknd. While still holding darker lyrical content and telling a solid narratively driven story, The Weeknd would adapt a new wave synth-heavy sound that would captivate listeners. Along with impressing sonically, this album is likely the most grandiose in The Weeknd's discography in terms of storytelling and rollout. While the album itself tells a story of grieving a girl that Abel had lost in a toxic relationship, both his performances and music videos during the After Hours era tell different tales. From late 2019 to early 2021, The Weeknd would progressively change his look, from interviews on late night shows, appearances on red carpets, and performances in music videos. The iconic outfit for the After Hours era sees Abel with the red suit and the shades on. But as the months went on, Abel would begin to develop some scars. First experiencing a wound on his nose, Abel would apply various bandages to his face before eventually he was completely hidden under the coverings. Eventually, when the bandages would be removed, Abel would be nearly unrecognizable, as in the Save Your Tears music video, he would display his new look after undergoing plastic surgery. The physical alterations during the After Hours era acts as a critique of Hollywood culture and the tendency of celebrities to manipulate their natural looks for validation of the public. Just as the relationship described on After Hours, celebrity culture is extremely toxic. Specifically in the music industry, artists go from grinding and making a song in their room to not being able to go out to dinner without being chased by the paparazzi. The pressure to look your best and please the harshest of critics online is real. Yet, Abel condemns traditional life in the limelight, staying true to himself and being known for living a private life despite being one of the biggest artists in the world. The After Hours era would end with a bang, as The Weeknd would perform at the 2021 Super Bowl halftime show. Running through his biggest hits while displaying impressive visuals in relation to the After Hours Vegas theme, Abel would put on an awesome show, ending the performance with blinding lights. But as I stated previously, the meaning behind Abel's appearances during the After Hours era and the story behind the album itself are completely different. Now that we know all the info regarding the lead up to this record's release, let's look deeper and examine the true story behind After Hours by dissecting the album track by track. A lot of the time with The Weeknd's music, his albums kind of start with an active relationship and takes the listener along for the ride as things eventually fall out or have a demise, etc. Interestingly enough, the After Hours story begins with the relationship already finished. On track 1, Alone Again, Abel is grieving the end of the relationship and questioning whether or not he'll be able to make it in life without his ex. The song begins with twinkly sounding synths as Abel begins his first verse speaking out of a place of desperation. Abel is coping with the fact that he no longer has his girl anymore, blowing money to try and stop his pain. A lot of his lines here in the first verse foreshadow other elements of the After Hours story. His mention of wearing a disguise here in the opening moments of this track obviously is calling back to Abel's character development with the bandages. But another big element of the After Hours story is just how wild Abel gets as the story furthers. The more time he spends alone as his ex continues to get further and further away from him, the crazier he gets. Teasing his future irrational behavior, Abel sings about being in Las Vegas, the setting for this album. Vegas is known as a place where people let go, they take chances, they deluge in their most wild pleasures and desires. As a man who cannot settle down and has had his demons ruin nearly every relationship he's had, Vegas is home for Abel. Abel is paying women, likely strippers, to be around him in hopes that maybe for just one moment he can forget about his heartbreak and feel something to save him from his lifeless state of sadness. The instrumental soon transitions and the beat drops, changing the tone of this intro track. Abel's sorrow is felt with the dramatic atmosphere created by the beat. The man who produced this beat, Elangelo, would later explain the process behind developing Alone Again's devastating sound after the release of After Hours. Elangelo would say that he wanted to stop looking at the track as a song and more like it was a movie or a state in another dimension, making it more than simply music. Rather than keeping to an ordinary song structure, the track sonically acts as an experience, with the haunting, bass-heavy instrumental transporting the listener into The Weeknd's world as he clings on to anything that could possibly help him escape his own mind post-breakup. Abel is self-medicating and trying all he can to lose feelings by spending money on hookers. Yet the pain always returns, and Abel longs for his ex. Stuck in an endless cycle of sadness, Abel doesn't know if he can continue on and make it without his girl by his side. He doesn't know if he could be alone again. On track 2, Too Late, we get insight into this relationship that Abel is grieving over. Unlike the intro track, this song's a lot more fast-paced, as Abel discusses how this girl was his escape. She was the person who made him the most happy. Now, she left him, and Abel is almost trying to convince her here on this song that they belong together. Now, obviously, it's not 100% known whether or not this is a conversation that's happening between Abel and this girl, or it's all just in his head, but I don't really think, like, they're meeting up at an IHOP and she's letting Abel even have a chance to try to win her back. I think this is more or less Abel's thought process as he stays up late at night thinking about his lost love. Abel says that it's too late to save him and his ex's souls. Because of their past actions, which will be elaborated on further into this album, they both are tainted and they can never be made innocent or pure. He acknowledges his wrongdoings, taking most of the blame for their bond falling apart, yet believes that he and this girl deserve each other. Abel also discusses celebrity culture on this track, talking about the press reporting on him and his ex's breakup. He asks how would they know in response to the press putting out articles about him and this girl ending things, alluding to the idea that he truly believes him and this girl will get back together. He refers to Los Angeles as hell, and hints at the idea that his status and the Hollywood lifestyle contributed to him and his girl's problems. Through his wording and his lyrics, Abel knows that him and this girl, they're not good for each other. But despite knowing this and taking blame for hurting her, Abel still can't move on. He still wishes that she was by his side and looking into his eyes. He still wants her. This song has an insanely awesome outro that I really think people don't discuss enough when talking about the genius of After Hours. The beat kind of picks up, and with the synths and there's like this eerie sample, it's genuinely one of my favorite parts of the album and no one fucking talks about it. Anyway, back to the story we go with track 3, Hardest to Love, where Abel reflects further on his past with this girl. Anyone who's listened to The Weeknd's music knows that he is a tortured soul. And this girl knew that. She tried to really make things work with him and gave him second chance after second chance every time that he made mistakes. The further into the relationship they got, and the more times they attempted to rekindle that special connection they had at the start, the more pain this girl had to live with and push down to try to make things work. Near the end of it all, Abel could see the hurt in her eyes due to his past words and actions. He himself admitted that what they once had has been dead for a very long time, yet she always continued to try and make it work. The longer the relationship went on, the more Abel could feel her trying to distance herself from him, trying to let him go. And it's all his fault. Now the time has officially come though where she left Abel, and while it was hard, she finally pulled the trigger. Abel understands that he fucked up, and he has to reap the consequences of his actions. When two people part, it's typically because of a big argument or a falling out. That is the same for Abel and his ex, but he begs her not to let their bad times overshadow the good ones. While things got rough in the end, he hopes that she could still remember the special moments they shared. Although he desperately misses her, Abel acknowledges the damage he has done on this song. And unlike on Too Late, he doesn't really try to convince her of anything anymore. He understands the hurt he has caused and even recognizes that their love is dead. Abel obviously wants her to stay more than anything in the world, but he understands why she is leaving, and he copes with her departure on track 4, Scared to Live. Abel stated on the previous song that he knew that his ex was trying to let him go. When he saw that in his girl, he tried even more to keep her to himself, when in reality she definitely would have returned to him in a healthy manner if they took some time away from each other. But of course, that is known in hindsight, and Abel doesn't beat himself up for loving her so passionately. Ultimately, because their love turned so toxic, the girl Abel lost has a tainted view on relationships following their breakup. Abel essentially has this song act as a ballad to his now gone love, telling her to not let him and his actions in the past stop her from eventually finding the right partner and finding happiness. We get further insight into Abel and his girl's past with the second verse. We know that they kept returning to each other because even through adversity, they still had love left. Abel explains how if this girl never moves on and only remembers and misses him, that she'll be missing out on the chance to connect with a guy and find someone else who's likely better for her. However, she simply cannot forget about Abel. Even when guys try to win her over, she simply is too damaged and has no love left to give with Abel still on her mind. Abel shows some slight hesitation in letting her go, saying how he's changed, he's no longer the man he used to be, yet reminds himself of his own wrongdoings and accepts his fate of losing this girl due to his own unfaithful behavior. Self-reflection is really important, especially after an emotional breakup. Abel no longer is going to beg this girl and try to manipulate her to stay. The only actions he can control are his own. And now that he's accepted the fact that it's his behavior that led to the relationship failing, he shifts attention to himself for a moment on track 5, Snow Child. This song is a lot more mellow than the other tracks on After Hours. Abel is essentially looking back on his rise and how he made it to the top. Now that he's made it to the peak and he's found success, fame isn't exactly what he thought it would be. While he can support his friends and family, life in LA is enabling him to deepen his worst habits. This song is an awesome callback to one of the Weeknd's first tracks, The Morning. On that song, which is featured on Abel's first mixtape House of Balloons, Abel says, "Cali's the mission." California obviously is where you have LA, and that's where a lot of people go to try to make it big, whether in music, acting, etc. But while making it to LA was the goal, now that he's experienced the California lifestyle, Abel hates it. He's leaving and returning home. Abel elaborates on his grievances with life in the limelight. He has a giant house that he's never able to relax in. He can't go anywhere without being flashed by the paparazzi, and it seems like everyone is out to try and sabotage his career. He is sick of the LA lifestyle, and he's returning home in an attempt to get away from it all. Now, Abel had previously alluded to the idea on this album that the LA environment helped contribute to the fall of his relationship. On track 6, Escape from LA, he doubles down on that concept and draws a parallel between the horrors of Los Angeles and his toxic love. Adding context to his earlier statement about his ex's soul not being salvageable, Abel reflects on the various cases of infidelity in their relationship. He mentions how she would pillow talk about the various guys wanting to be with her while she was still dating Abel. They would buy her things all the time, trying to win her over. Abel, as well as his ex, were both corrupted by the LA lifestyle. While he was excited at the idea of being rich, being famous, making it in LA, the dream is truly not what he believed it would be. He has everything he could possibly want. All the material possessions in the world, the fancy cars, the big house, the status, yet it all means nothing because the one thing he truly wants, the one person he wants by his side, has left him. As he says, LA is nothing like it seemed it would be. In fact, in Abel's eyes, it is the leading factor as to why the one he loved is now gone. But this lifestyle didn't just corrupt his ex. As the beat drops, a sinister atmosphere is created as Abel relives a night of his own infidelity. He describes his mistress, a typical young girl in the city with her lip fillers and other cosmetic advancements. Abel notes how all girls in LA look the same, but it doesn't bother him because when he's in the zone, nothing matters. On this track, Abel not only realizes that Los Angeles likely influenced the wrongdoings of himself and his ex, but also alludes to the idea of the city being the catalyst for his demise. Abel's flashback to a wild hookup in the studio triggers him to go off the deep end. Abel has been sad, alone, and depressed for a long time now, and is essentially entering the fuck you, nothing matters stage of grief. Abel spirals into a manic state of hysteria, self-indulgence, partying, and delusion on track 7, Heartless. Abel is back to his old reckless ways, contradicting all of his previous statements about changing over an insane beat produced by Metro Boomin. The previously heartbroken Abel takes on a whole new position on his love life, and it appears that his ego is back through his lyrics on this track as he trips on all sorts of drugs. However, we know this confidence to be completely false, as his first two lines on this song completely contradict themselves. While tripping his ass off, Abel is having interactions with all sorts of different girls. Despite his various intimate interactions with pretty much all of them, he has no intentions of settling down with any of these women. And Abel describes himself perfectly on the chorus. After being left by the one girl he truly loved, he's become heartless. Being abandoned by his love has truly got Abel back into his old ways, compensating with drugs and sex to try and stop the pain. He tried to better himself, he tried to reflect and take accountability, but his sorrow has consumed him. Abel truly thought that he had found the one, but after losing her, he doubts that he'll ever find a woman willing to accept a man as broken as himself. No matter who he meets, no matter how close they get to him, Abel will always slip back into his old ways. He's always and forever a slave to his personal vices. And now that he's been abandoned by the one person who he described as the light to his darkness, Abel's been pushed off the deep end. He's lost both his heart and his mind. The madness continues on track 8, Faith, where Abel continues down a reckless path of hedonism. Just like Heartless, this song has a very intense beat, but the craziness and euphoria of Abel's high is now gone. His feelings creep back into his subconscious, and Abel attempts to chase his original relapsed high. Abel lists coke, weed, and Molly as he consumes every drug available to him at this time in an attempt to once again not think about his lost love. As he fades into a wild high, Abel says that he has lost his faith. Now, Abel doesn't legitimately mean that losing this girl has turned him into an atheist. There's a saying that Abel even uses in this song called losing my religion, and it is essentially used to describe someone who's acting a little crazy. They've kind of gone nuts. So by saying that he's lost his faith, Abel is essentially saying that through this heartbreak, he's lost his mind. Abel is obviously overwhelmed by his own sadness. It's what's driving him to abuse all these substances. But the issue with drugs is that eventually the high wears off. And when it does, when Abel's coming down, that's when he says he feels the most alone. There's a moment after the first chorus where Abel reflects on his own regression, but the way in which he changes his tone of voice almost makes it seem like these words are coming from a neutral or a sober state. While he tried to better himself and change for his girl, he's accepting that he will never rise above his vices. He tells his ex not to feel sorry for him. While he was driven here by her departure, Abel believes that he was destined to return to this lifestyle, disappointing both himself and her. Although Abel has contradicted himself a lot since Heartless, one thing that we know to be 100% true is that he really loved his ex. Even when his brain is melting, he shows loyalty to his past girl, discussing the idea of wanting to die laying right next to her. He misses her dearly. No matter how high he gets, she is still always on his mind. We enter the bridge as the beat drops out and Abel repeats a cold sediment. In partaking in a wild nightlife and chasing a high to numb his emotional pain, Abel has lost himself. Over the years, as his fame has grown and he's earned more responsibility, Abel has done little to work on himself. He is scarred. A broken man who, yes, has hurt many women, but at the same time, has been hurt as well. Rather than trying to eliminate his demons, Abel has simply ignored them and pushed them to the side as he held on to the one woman he loved. Abel, rather than confronting his own problems, relied on her to fill the void. But his unresolved problems are what pushed her away and led to her now being in his rearview mirror, in his past. Now, she is gone, and those demons have him by the throat. As the beat transitions into a synth-heavy, ambient instrumental, we hear the distant sounds of sirens. Abel's carelessness and wild behavior has finally caught up to him, as he overdoses at the end of this track. On the outro, he sings of his current state as he is driven through the city in the back of an ambulance. As he's rushed to the hospital for help, he drifts in and out of consciousness as the bright lights of the city shine in his face and blind his vision. Abel falls unconscious and enters a dreamlike state in the back of the ambulance as we get to track 9, Blinding Lights. A low synth riff is heard at the beginning of this song before some drums kick in, and a grand 80s inspired hyperpop instrumental floods the listener's ears. Abel is hallucinating and dreaming at this part of the After Hours story, but the sonic atmosphere created by the synths on this track almost take the listener along for the ride with him. Further proving that Abel is now in a different state is his change in tone from Blinding Lights to how he sounded on Faith. On Faith, he sounded desperate, a man aware of his active downfall as a result of his own mistakes. However, on this track, Abel's knowledge of his own mental and emotional demise is gone. He is free of his own worries, blinded by his own psychosis as he drifts away from his troubles in reality. Although he is no longer consciously awake, Abel still longs for his ex, even in his dreams. However, his calling for her is a lot less dramatic. Abel is almost playful and teasing with the way in which he invites her back into his life, especially with his vocal delivery. He relates his time without his girl to that of an addict who hasn't got their usual drug supply, withdrawing from his past love and needing simply a touch to feel right once again. Without his girl, Abel is on edge and distraught. He only gets relief from her presence. Another thing that clarifies Abel's departure from reality is the fact that this track takes place in Las Vegas. In this dream that Abel's experiencing, he's partying in Sin City. Although he spoke of plans to leave California on escape from LA, he was still in Los Angeles when he OD'd. However, none of that matters at this moment. Abel is on cloud 9, with no recollection of his sadness, having the city of Vegas all to himself. But like I said, although Abel isn't feeling the emotional effects of his depression in this delusional state, he still keeps bringing her up. He still longs for his ex. Through his lyrics, it's clear that he feels incomplete without her, referring to life without his girl as blurry. On the hook, Abel reiterates the idea of this girl being the only one to aid him when he was overwhelmed or stressed out by his status. He is blinded by the lights of the celebrity lifestyle, except now he has nobody to confide in or even share the benefits of his success. Abel is gone, his mind's in another world, yet he still pledges loyalty to the woman who left him. Abel's love for this woman is so deep that he still shows commitment to her in his dreams. Yet, Abel fears that he didn't communicate his feelings strong enough when they were together, and says that if she does come back, he will never let her go again. Abel drowned in the night, partaking in all sorts of wild behavior, and eventually paid the price by overdosing. His body forcefully shutting down after an insane amount of drug use is the only reason that Abel was finally able to sleep. As if he was sober, he would need validation from his girl to rest. But his dreams continue on, as we get into track 10, In Your Eyes, as Abel analyzes the factors that doomed his relationship. The more upbeat energy continues following Blinding Lights, showing that Abel is still not conscious and that everything post-Faith is all in his head. Again, Abel remembers his ex's infidelity, this time in his dream. Abel thought back about his ex cheating a few tracks back on Escape from LA, but this point of view is so much more current seeming because Abel is experiencing this reflection in a state of psychosis. This shit seems real, as he basically relives it in his mind. Even though Abel knew that his girl was cheating, he always pushed off addressing it. He pretended not to know. He acted as if he was oblivious to her unfaithful activities because he didn't want to face the reality that was their relationship falling apart. However, the harsh truth behind the rough state of their love is impossible to avoid. Every time Abel looks into her eyes, he sees the pain he has caused inside her. Obviously, she's the one who cheated on Abel, but something that Abel did pushed her to get that motivation and see someone else in secret. Most of the time, people don't cheat when they're 100% happy with their relationship. She had to be unsatisfied with something. And as we know, Abel admitted to being unfaithful as well. They both are at fault for their fire burning out, as Abel shows with his variation of lyrics on the pre-chorus. At first, he says, "I can tell what you've done when I look at you in your eyes." But the second time around, Abel says, "I'm ashamed of what I've done when I look at you in your eyes. She attempts to smile and hide the pain, while Abel acts oblivious to her unloyal acts. They both do not want to face the truth. Abel has tried to be with other girls following the fallout of this relationship, yet he still cannot forget about his ex. Simply nothing could compare to his lost love, as he explains how she was always on his mind through every date and hookup. Now this song ends with an insane saxophone outro performed by Thomas Jansen. Complemented by the synths on that song, the sax sounds outstanding and sends us into track 11, Save Your Tears, the last song to take place in Abel's imagination and hold the upbeat energy. Occupied by a bass, acoustic guitar, and those 80s inspired synths, this song has an incredible vibe that perfectly complements the themes of Abel's lyrics. While still in a state of delusion relative to that of a dream, Abel finds himself in a club, where his ex also is in attendance. Abel notes her apparent happiness, a look that he is not used to seeing, due to the last of their memories together at the end of their relationship being so negative. Once they lock eyes, she begins to cry, remembering her past with Abel and unlocking both happy and sad memories. Either way, whether she's focusing on those positive memories or maybe the negative ones, Abel doesn't want her remembering how he treated her whatsoever. He will do anything to get her back, including manipulation and neglecting her emotions. Abel tells her to save her tears and stop crying. And while he is doing this in an effort to gain her love back, he's exposing the fact that he has not changed, and shining a light on one of the reasons that their relationship fell apart. Through this experience, Abel comes to understand just how wrong it was of him to ignore her sadness, and comes to terms with the fact that this girl deserves much better than him, regardless of how much he still loves her. This awakening sends Abel into a spiral of reflection, as he runs through the various things he did that hurt his ex. He abandoned her when issues arise rather than trying to talk things over. He made her think that he would always be there for her, only to bail when she needed him most for emotional support. And he said hurtful shit that she will never forget. Ultimately, we come to learn that Abel has been so heartless because he himself got his heart broke in a past relationship. However, that doesn't excuse his behavior, and now his lack of personal growth and maturity has doomed his chances with the person who meant the most to him. While numb to his emotional pain in this unconscious state, Abel admits that in his mind, he knows that he's not good for this girl. As Abel said himself, she deserves someone better than him. But as his mind tells him to let her go, he simply cannot, as his heart requires her to continue beating. Regardless of Abel's refusal to let go and move on from her, it does not matter how exactly Abel's ex looks back on their time together. On Save Your Tears, Abel is fighting in his mind to stop his ex from remembering his wrongdoings, all in an attempt to get her back. However, in reality, the opportunity to rekindle their love has passed. As Abel awakens from his drug-induced episode, he soon learns that his girl has moved on. On track 12, Repeat After Me interlude, Abel copes with the heartbreaking news of his ex-love seeing someone else by repeating a repetitive mantra. Bridging the gap between Abel's dreams and reality, this song opens with a very eerie sounding organ, sonically personifying emotional trauma and shock. Abel has broken from his fanatical state, and has to face the cold reality of his ex-love moving on from him. While the organ fades in louder, a slow beat drops before Abel begins to speak figuratively to his ex. While he is phrasing it as if he's speaking directly to her, this conversation isn't legitimately happening. Abel is imagining what he would say to her in an attempt to brainwash her into remaining his. While this would be a procedure done to her, Abel is repeating this mantra in an attempt to soothe himself and help him cope with his intensified sadness. He tells himself that she doesn't really love her new man. Abel chooses to believe that she is with this new person simply out of spite for a hookup. Through all the infidelity that occurred during their rocky relationship, the idea that this girl is only with this new dude for sex lessens the pain for Abel. However, from an outside perspective, watching Abel repeat this mantra as if he's talking to someone who isn't actually there It's clear that he's become delusional. Abel is forcing himself to believe that his ex is only with this new man because she's trying to hurt his feelings and make him jealous. But suddenly he questions whether or not maybe this new guy is treating her better than he did. Once that idea crosses his mind, he quickly shuts it down, refusing to let his lost love go. Again, Abel repeats his mantra, dedicated to ingrain the idea in his mind that his girl doesn't truly love her new man. He wants so desperately to make it so that she still loves him. And while Abel wishes he could get her to believe this, he simply does not have control over her any longer. While his heart still belongs to her, she has finally moved on, and Abel has officially hit rock bottom. His one true love has found someone else, and he is all alone. The one person he confided in, trusted, opened up to, and loved has not only abandoned him, but now has officially moved on, pledging loyalty to another man. At his breaking point, on track 13, After Hours, Abel is his most upset, most vulnerable, and most desperate, while he begs and pleads one last time for his girl to return to his lonely life. Acting as an apology letter for his past mistakes, this song sees Abel addressing the very relationship that meant the most to him, yet failed due to his actions. After waking up from overdosing, Abel addresses his time while unconscious. He got so fucked up to minimize the pain he felt over losing this girl. His heartbreak led him to OD. While unconscious, Abel was fighting for his life, but now that he's woken up and entered back into reality, he's now experiencing the real nightmare. Heavy single note drums hit in spaced out frequencies as Abel powerfully speaks from the heart, exposing his devotion and loyalty to the very woman who left him. Without her, he cannot think, speak, or even breathe. He has not been the same since she left. Following Abel's dramatic proclamation, the beat drops and the energy picks up. But it's not a vibe similar to Blinding Lights or even Heartless. This isn't a song that you get up and dance to. This is a track that you listen to and you put on while you're paralyzed in your bed, thinking about the one that got away and holding back tears. The energy perfectly matches Abel's desperate state as he sings about his thoughts and actions that occur after hours. Despite getting out and trying to move on from this girl, Abel cannot fill the void that her absence has created in his life. This track sonically sounds very similar to that of Abel's early work on Kissland and Trilogy. And just as Abel's delivery on this track is similar to that of his darker era, so is his mindset. He's lost the one person who gave him life. He's truly back to being heartless. Abel loves this girl so much that she even appears in his dreams. Because of this, he puts himself to sleep as much as possible in order to be with her in the only way that he can. Yet, he's reminded of his loss every time that he wakes up. He has to turn in that bed and see that she is no longer next to him. Abel has went this whole time throughout the After Hours story without officially contacting his ex, but he can't hold back any longer. He finally gives in and calls her, spilling his feelings to his lost love. He needs her now more than he ever has. He's officially at his lowest and desperately needs her love. He has no drive to move on from her and try to develop another relationship with a different person. If she doesn't return to his arms, he doesn't know if he'll make it. There isn't anything Abel wouldn't do to be able to hold her once again, and he apologizes sincerely for breaking her heart. Abel looks back on his recent actions, attempting to avoid his sadness through hookups and drug use. He was spending money to compensate for his broken heart, yet he found out the hard way that nothing and nobody could stop the pain created from her absence. He vows to never let her go again if she gives him that second chance, yet Abel knows that her heart no longer longs for him. The beat fades out as Abel faces his darkest truth, accepting the blame for their relationship ending as well as hurting the very person he loved the most. He twisted words, gaslighted, and manipulated this woman, taking her love and support for granted. Without it, he is lost, and likely to never be the same again. Although this girl hurt Abel too with her wrongdoings in the relationship, he still rides for her. He would be willing to forget about it all in order to get her back in his life, back in his arms, so he could feel complete again. But she's over him. While Abel cannot get her off his mind, she's already moved on and is likely to soon forget about him while he longs for her love forever. Abel is destined for a life of loneliness and despair, as he must come to terms with the fact that he himself is the sole reason that his one shot at true love slipped through his hands. On track 14, Until I Bleed Out, Abel sings from a place of hopelessness. Now understanding that his girl will never return to him, Abel is paralyzed. He has realized that he is his own worst enemy, and that his past actions that made his career have led him to lose the very person who meant the most to him. He is self-medicated to numb the pain so much, but now Abel is sick of being high. He wants to get sober. He wants to try and move on, yet Abel is exhausted from his emotional trauma and sorrow. After losing her for the final time, Abel desperately wishes that he could completely forget about his ex. The pain resumes every time she crosses his mind. He would sacrifice every good memory they shared together if it meant that it would stop the hurt. She will never return to him, yet Abel still can't remove her from his mind. Previously, he would put himself to sleep so that he could see her in his dreams. Now, Abel's biggest desire is to cut her from his fantasies. While he tries and tries to get over her, he can't. No matter how many times he tells himself that he does not need love, she creeps back into his subconscious. Like a drug, Abel is withdrawing from her love, but all he could do now is tell himself that he doesn't need it. Her decision to finally leave has left a cut so deep that Abel is bleeding profusely. Abel has been abandoned by his one true love and left to bleed out all alone.